Serious Redditors who have lived in a haunted house. What are your most unexplainable paranormal experiences? In 2012, my stepfather overdosed on heroin and dropped dead in the hallway in his condo apartment. My mum had to move out shortly after since they were already behind on mortgage bills. A few months later, my lease went up and I was barely making ends meet and couldn't find a new roommate. My mum offered me the key to the condo apartment to squat for a few months until one saved up enough for my own apartment. I took the offer and moved into the condo apartment. After a month or so, I was asleep in the living room, and I had this dream of him standing in the hallway facing the living room. He was looking at me and smiling, laughing. Even made a stupid joke and everything. It wasn't disturbing at all, just bittersweet. Then I suddenly woke, when I felt some pressure stroking down my head and back. There was nothing around me and it tripped me the hell out. As a skeptical person that doesn't believe in the paranormal, it has to be some kind of sensory hallucination. It was still nice to see him in my dream once again though. Made me tear up typing this. R.I.P. Darren. Mildly interesting fact, he dropped dead on July 13th in 2012. On a Friday the 13th. Moved from the US to the UK, and our parents bought an old beat-up house. It still had lead pipes for the water. Nightmare all on its own. Anyway, work proceeded on the house whilst we lived there. We started seeing bright lights in the corners of rooms at night. Footsteps on floorboards, the house had carpet. I was about 6 at the time and started getting woken up in the night by a little girl, who would dance on my chest of drawers for me. I was frickin' terrified. My mum just fobbed it off as me dreaming. Workmen complained of strange things happening like tools being moved and odd feeling like being watched. After about a year of this, my eldest sister's friend stayed overnight. She woke the whole house up screaming, saying a little girl had been in her room. She had apparently pulled her from the bed. The friend left the house and refused to ever come back. Mum decided she might need to do something about it and got some advice. He suggested my mum and the whole family should treat the presences as part of the family. So when we got home we shout, "Hi, we are home, did you have a good day?" Over time the house settled and we didn't get any more trouble. We also found out a little girl did die in the house of asthma. My parents still live there, and it is a beautiful homely place now. I live in a house built in the 1800s. It survived the 2 world wars and it's seen some shit, I imagine. One of the previous owners had 2 sons, who both committed suicide. A lot of strange stuff happens. The animals, dog and parrots, will wake up from their naps and follow something with their heads just as they would follow me if I walk around. Also, before I switched rooms in the house, my brother had a room and he refused to sleep there as he would hear voices. He slept with my parents, he was a child, until the day he got my old room, and since then has slept in that room without problems. There's also a whole floor we don't use and I sleep in the attic, and I pass through that floor to get to my attic. Weird explanation, but it's a weird house, and I have a motion-activated light there that goes on as I'm walking the stairs to that unused floor. It would also switch on in the middle of the night while nobody is walking under the motion detector. Also, there's cold spots. A lady who had 2 husbands die on her in the same house. That's the house my dad decides to buy. The first one hung himself from the rafters in the garage, and the second one fell ill and died in his bed in the basement. I lived in the basement room, and often just felt like I was being watched all the time. The bedroom in the basement has a secret storage room behind a bookshelf with a locking latch. I would always wake up to find the door wide open. It happened so often that I would wake up cold and routinely go shut and lock the latch of the door in the middle of the night. For the longest time, I thought it was my dad or stepbrothers messing with me, but it wasn't. My stepbrother now occupies that room and he says it still happens to him, and that he's even seen it open on its own. There are no air vents or anything, so I've ruled out wind. Also in the garage, I always see light coming from under the door through the crack only to open the door to pitch black. I've heard sounds coming from the garage, only to find saw blades clanging together, and slightly rotating in their place on the whole storage wall. Didn't think anything of it at first, but when you find shit moving on more than one occasion, it makes you look over your shoulder at the rafters and wonder. I lived in a house for about 5 years that was haunted, but not in a malicious way. In a shitty roommate kind of way. I'd come home to the windows on the second floor being open when it was raining. To food containers being open in the fridge that I hadn't touched yet. The worst was that the ghost hated clocks. She hated them. I had antique cuckoo clocks that had worked for 50 years that would just stop. Brand new wall clocks that ate through batteries like it was candy. My watch ended up on the floor one morning, the crystal shattered, even though I knew I slept with it on. The one that pissed me off the most was that I got a brand new Kit Kat clock for Christmas, and the bitch threw it off the wall. I was cooking and out of corner of my eye saw the cat freaking fly. Turned around and it was across the kitchen. Broken. It was brand new. Man, she was a bitch. When I was around 9 to 10 years old, I remember waking up to see a large shadow stood at the foot of my bed. I was living with my dad at the time. He has a very large, 5 floors, terrace house built in the 1800s. Every so often there would be an unexplainable event happen, such as footsteps when there's no one there or voices. On the night this happened, it was just my dad and one in the house. My sister was staying with my mum at the time. One woke up and noticed the door to my room was wide open. I normally sleep with it closed. I then became aware of a large, around 7 foot tall, shadow-like figure watching me from the end of the bed. When the figure noticed me, it seemed to melt into the floor and the door to my room slammed shut. Understandably, I was slightly traumatized by the whole experience. Asked my dad the next day if he was in my room, and he denied any knowledge of the event. He's not the type of person that likes jokes. My uncle's house out on a very eastern part of NY was said to be haunted due to the family that used to own it in the 1800s decided not to give it to the stableman and sold it instead. He and the maid were said to have haunted the place. We always used to joke that you would hear people or things moving at night, but since the house is so old, we used to just laugh it off. My uncle's friend had her and her sister stay over the house one night, and the friend noticed a maid bringing towels down the stairs when she woke. She saw the maid again, bringing what looked like a percolator down the stairs. She was so impressed by my uncle hiring staff. He is a neurologist in NYC, so he had a habit of spending a little bit extra. She went back to bed and woke up later downstairs to see my uncle and his friend just chatting. She asked where the maid went and she thought that the maid was cooking breakfast. My uncle had no idea what she was talking about and asked what she looked like. The sister explained and he laughed. Walked her to the living room and pointed to an old picture. She said that was the woman. My uncle replied, yeah, she has been dead for about 100 years. Edit * percolator. I lived in one when I was a teen, along with my parents. Several instances come to mind. We were remodeling an old farmhouse and had been there a couple of months before witnessing anything. One day I was underneath my truck, which was supported by only a jack. Stupid, I know, I was in the middle of working on it, with no good reason to get out at that moment. Suddenly the overwhelming urge to get out from underneath overwhelmed me. No sooner than I got out, the truck fell to the ground, the jack had slipped. Freaked Dad out, he thought I was under it. When Mom got home, we mentioned it, and she started crying, sobbing pretty hard. It turns out the previous owner died in the driveway, under a vehicle, in that spot. One would often see moving shadows, and strangely hear music from the upstairs area. The windows of the old house were corked shut, and blackbirds would often get caught between the panes. We ended up replacing all the windows, but we had to break 3 inside panes to get them out. One of the more disturbing things happened when my mother was cooking breakfast. She turned away to get something out of the cabinet, and when she turned back around, all the forks set out were bent straight up. A little backstory. Growing up, my brother and I lived with our single mother. The house was a little 500 square foot home, but we were young so it wasn't a huge deal. My mom remarried, and the newlyweds decided to tear down the old house and build a ranch on the land. Strange, but explainable, things started happening after we moved back in. One of the strangest things to happen was when my brother and I were in the house alone. We were hanging out at an island in the kitchen, talking about what teenage boys talk about, when I hear the faintest whisper of someone saying my brother's name. Probably just hearing things. About 30 seconds later, a little louder, my brother's name again. He was talking when I heard the second whisper, and he seemed to hear it too because he stopped what he was saying briefly. Finally, about 15 seconds after the second interruption, clearly and angrily, a raspy voice says his name. We looked at each other and he asked, "Did someone just say my name?" I told him I'd heard it more than once. He said 3 times, right? We grabbed our coats and went to get Burger King. From ages 5 to 17 I lived in a house with activity. It was all pretty basic run-of-the-mill stuff: footsteps, voices, lights turning on and off, doors opening and shutting, batteries draining, etc. If we started renovating, which we almost always were, they'd get more active and start throwing stuff. I got used to it. They didn't hurt us, so we just let it go. Even my father started believing after a while. But the worst thing they ever did was while we were moving in. I was 5. My friend and I were playing in the only room that was finished in the basement while my parents were moving the stuff in. My friend's parents were helping. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut. No wind, no draft, no explanation. Then the lock engaged with a click, and someone started laughing. We were stuck in the room for 2 hours. Edit, forgot about the time my Newfoundland, the sweetest dog I ever met, stood in the doorway of my parents' room with all her hackles up, barking at nothing. Barking her get the fuck out bark. We lost our first home during the housing collapse. It was heartbreaking. Both my husband and I grew up in rentals. Home ownership was a big deal for us both, losing it because my biggest shame. It took several years to right the ship, and I am proud to say, we bounced back better than ever. After a long search we found our dream. A beautiful affordable cabin in the woods. The previous owner of my house died in a motorcycle crash. The house had been on the market for years prior to our closing. I dreamed that the previous owner left me a fruit basket and a handwritten card which read, "Take care of it for me." When we moved in, I found vintage mason jars with fruit baskets etched in them. That first year it seemed whenever we needed something like a simple tool or screw to fix something in the house, it would just turn up in the shed or in a cabinet. He built the house with his own 2 hands. He converted it from an old hunting cabin into a 4-bedroom house. It was a labor of love for him. Here is the crazy thing, we decided to research his accident. He died 3 years before we moved in, on the exact day that we lost our first house. I rented, and later bought, a house in Denver, Colorado, and there were 2 stairways into the basement. The door to the front stairway was always closed and we never used it. Steep stairs, always super cold, not terribly convenient. That door would swing open every day, or so while I was sitting on the couch, and then close. I would get up to go check it, and it would be latched shut. As I was preparing to buy the house from the landlord, I got a note from an attorney that they and the police wanted to come over and do some crime scene shit, which was really super interesting. And that's how I found out that the previous tenant, Jane, had shot herself in the chest while cleaning a shotgun, while her husband was in the basement. And he didn't hear it. And he was acquitted. But I wasn't on the jury, so I digress. So, now that I had a name for her, whenever the door would open, I would ask Jane to bring me back some cigarettes. She never did. After I bought the house, I had it smudged and cleansed by a psychic who told her it was okay to go. And the door never opened on its own again. As a kid I would make stupid videos with my friends, and sometimes I liked to re-watch them and cringe at our shenanigans. Quite recently I re-watched a video a friend and I made in 0809. The video consists of our usual fucking about. Halfway through the video there is a short 2-second clip, wherein my friend is flailing a toy sword around and screaming in my room. My friend is sitting with his back to the open door. A dark figure is seen walking down the hallway past the open door. The figure is only visible a split second, but there is no doubt something passed by. The thing is, I remember vividly being home alone that day. My father always told me a guy burned to death in that hallway, and my mother swore she sometimes heard coughing at night. I remember the hallway always smelling faintly of smoke, even though no one in my family smoked. I don't know, kinda spooky. We used to live in a house that was built in 1956. There were several things that happened. When my middle daughter was in preschool and kindergarten, she would be trying to go to sleep, and would be crying that someone touched her hair, touched her feet, and even said her name in her ear. Finally, when all three of my girls were in school, I went into her bedroom and said, "Whoever is touching her and saying her name, please stop. I know you only want to get her attention, but you are scaring her." After that, it never happened again. Around the same time, we removed the carpet in our living room and hallway and put down a wood floor. My husband went to work nights and I would always hear a child running in the hallway. I would get up and check my three girls and they would be fast asleep. It happened so often that I stopped checking on the kids. Once my husband was off and even he heard it. He was sleeping, woke up and said one of the girls was up. I said no they weren't and he said, "They are." I heard them running in the hallway. I had previously not even mentioned it to him because he is a huge skeptic, and TBH, I didn't want to deal with his attitude about it. This will probably get buried, but my first house growing up always gave me the creeps. I was super young, but I remember it super well. I hated nap time and being in my room, because it gave me the creeps. I felt fine everywhere else in the house, but didn't even like playing by myself in my room, and would often hear breathing in my ears similar to when you can hear blood pumping in your ears. I somehow convinced my parents to let me sleep with an inflatable alligator pool floaty, because I thought it would protect me from the ghosts. We didn't even have a pool and lived in the Midwest, so IDK how I made that happen. One night I was waiting to go to sleep with my gator suffocation hazard that somehow was okay in the very early 90s. And in the dark I see a figure of a man form in the middle on my bedroom. He looked like my grandpa, who was alive at the time, had clothes which looks like they were maybe from the 30s or 40s, and was just silently raking my bedroom carpet with one of those longish metal rakes. He did that for a few minutes then vanished. I wasn't scared when I saw him, and in retrospect it's kind of funny, because WTF. After that I wasn't scared of my house anymore and never saw him again. I don't believe in the paranormal. I love reading threads like this though so much, but I know what I experienced was real, despite being super young, so who knows. Maybe it was some childhood hallucination or something, but if you feel that distinct feeling of uneasiness somewhere, you know what I'm talking about. There completely could be a logical explanation, but it's still one of my most vivid childhood memories. I lived in a basement of a duplex that I believe was haunted. I had a few experiences there involving seeing a shadow figure. One night my wife woke me up and said someone's in the house. Okay, my heart is pounding already. I get out of bed and look down the hallway and see a figure standing there at the end of the hallway in the kitchen, then the figure turns and walks out of view. I walk a few steps into the hall to turn the light on and start yelling at this person I think is intruding into my place. I get into the kitchen and nobody is there. I didn't hear any noises or see any sign of anyone being in the apartment. They would have had to cross my field of view to leave the apartment. I got back in bed and asked my wife how she knew someone was in the house. She said she woke up and looked down the hallway and saw someone standing there. My wife had to work graveyard shifts for a month right after this, and it was so hard to sleep by myself after that. I thought about it every single night I was trying to fall asleep. My grandmother lived in a house that was haunted for a few years. We called him Fred. You could hear Fred walking around at the attic, pictures would regularly fall off of the walls, and sometimes the silverware drawer would be open and its contents all over the floor. One night my great-grandparents were sleeping in the guest bedroom. My great-grandmother woke up to use the restroom, but heard someone taking a shower in there. She assumed it was my aunt and waited outside the door until she was done, not sure why she didn't go to a different bathroom. It was a small house, so maybe there was only one. Anyways, whoever was in the shower got out and used the hairdryer, then the door opened and no one came out. My great-grandmother got so scared she woke up my great-grandpa, packed her packs and had her drive him home. She didn't visit again as long as she lived there. I'm a very skeptical person, but thing that gets me is that my grandma hired a water witch and all of these experiences stopped. Maybe a homeless guy was living in the attic, or maybe Fred the ghost was kicked out by the witch. I've never shared this because LVE always chalked it up to being a spaz, but maybe there's something more to it. My parents were the second people to live in the house they purchased when I was in 4th grade. The previous owner was a couple in their mid-30s without kids. This is only strange because the house was at a 2-year-old home set up for a family 4BR, 4.5 bath, IDK square feet. The other strange thing was a heavy bolt lock on the outside of the basement door. I remember my parents thought it was strange when we moved in, but we all quickly accepted it as part of the house. I never spent much time down there until my parents got it finished my senior year of high school. I would sleep on the couch down there to watch TV late night, and make it easier to sneak in and out on the weekends. Things started to get weird. I'd wake up with this feeling of panic, but couldn't move. One time I remember seeing a black figure in the corner of the room and feeling real genuine fear. I felt like my life was in danger. Closed my eyes and talked myself for hours. It seemed about it not being real till I eventually passed out. Just thought I was a spaz, but some of these stories are making me feel like maybe something was going on down there. Anyways, can't wait to spend time. Wasn't a haunted house, but a murder house. My husband worked in a bar, so on my own a lot. Late one night I'm watching TV in our bedroom alone. One of those real crime shows come on and it showed my city. I thought that sounds funny, then my suburb, that's a bit weird, then my street, then the camera started going down my driveway. We were in an apartment block, so strange, but not crazy yet. Then they go right down the end. Only our apartment, and one below us. Then they start climbing the stairs, and that's where the oh shit starts to settle in, and I realize why our rent is so cheap. Not only was a woman murdered in my apartment that still looked identical 20 years later, but she was murdered in my bedroom, where I am alone in the dark, watching TV. I live in a mildly haunted house. It was built in the early years of the 20th century, and I've lived in it since 2003. When we first moved in, we sometimes could hear footsteps coming through the front door at about 6 p.m. I know it was not just me because my son thought his dad had come home. He hadn't. We changed the back part of the house to remove an old veranda to extend the living area. One night I heard someone on the old veranda call out, "Hello." I was just around the corner, and it totally freaked me out for a second because I thought someone had broken in. Nobody was there. We had a door that refused to close, too old, so we did a makeshift thing where we tied string around the handle, so if anyone wanted to shut it they just put the string over to a hook. I was just sitting near it and string danced for me one day, just like someone was playing with it, letting me know they were there. The most recent thing happened the other day. I was really upset by something that happened at work. I got home and was in my study when I saw a person-shaped figure, no features, at the door, kind of peering. It moved back when I fully turned my head. This entity is not very active and never evil, so I figure we just share the house together. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this one.